Hi guys, Jagelsdorf here. You missed me? Nah, don't say nothing. I know you didn't. But I missed you! Anyway, I know that I didn't post for a long time and I can't guarantee that it will change anytime soon, but let's make the best out of time that we have together, alright? So, this goddamn cathedral. Honestly, I wasn't even sure for some time if I'm even going to manage to finish it, you know? For someone like me, this was a giant project full of trial and errors, and errors that I hope you are not going to make thanks to this video. So if you need a refresher of what we've done in the previous parts, pachow, one of these sites, check this out. Check all the previous parts out. So, in the previous episode, we left the cathedral with the roof scaffold glued together. Now we need to clad it in something, and I envisioned it being clad in copper or bronze, you know, like on all the old important buildings and cathedrals. You have this nice blue patina covered sheets of copper. So for that I simply cut cardboard squares, somewhat larger than usual roof tiles, as these copper panels tend to be quite large in real life. And then, as with any other model roof, it's just a matter of gluing your tiles to your scaffold. In between, I check every now and then to see if the roof still sits properly on the model, as it's meant to be taken off during the game so that it can be also easily played inside. I also installed some additional supports to make the structure a bit more rigid and have more place to glue my tiles on. And also I made a big gaping hole on the left side where the fallen tower is, you know, from all the bricks and stuff falling through the roof. I also decided to first glue all the panels on and then fit them to the tower still standing, the other tower. You know, I am a big fan of cutting things on the model in vivo, so to say. I also waited with the weathering and damaging till the roof was completely glued together. In my opinion, it's more realistic this way and it's definitely easier. And to do this I simply use a combination of scissors and my trusty knife. Then, as a little break, I decided to start painting the insides. I painted all the walls white and all the additional floor elements green. And in order to paint it nice and properly, you have to do it in a one, slow and steady, almost snail-like draw of your brush. Yeah, yes, and some other elements got painted as well. Yeah, stuff. Whew. Anyway, back to the roof and all the other wood elements for a while as the paint on the inside dries. Recently I took fancy to using wood stain on my balsa wood to stain the wood. One of the very few tips from Luke Towan that actually stayed in my little head. I really think that this combination of different stains, washes and paints gives the wood a really nice finish. Ah yes, washes, speak of the devil. In a classic move to quickly shade and weather all the inside, I covered it totally in black wash and dry brushed the heck out of it while trying to do some fancy camera work. As all of it dried, I came back for the wood elements again and added additional shading with layers of washes as previously stated, and I tried to focus on the parts in between the boards and in all the nooks and crannies where the dirt and the shade would normally be. So next, the element that is going to give all the life to this building, the roof. First, I tried to mix some nice patina color on myself, but I kind of failed and got really frustrated and fed up with it, and to be honest, I left the project laying for quite some time.
2,000 years later.
But then I convinced my cheap ass to buy some proper paint and some proper colors, and then with twice the motivation as before, I got to work. I used the... Oh, wait. I used the turquoise green by Amsterdam paints, and the roof was painted in no time, although the inside gave me a bit more troubles. With all the basic elements done, I decided it still didn't look ruined enough. So I weathered it more by chopping random bits of the wood and covered it in more of the magic shading / weathering compound number 1, the black wash. As you see, it looks quite dramatic while wet, but it mellows out after drying and after a layer of dry brush. Which followed right away my basic technique of a basic color dry brush and then a lighter dry brush on top of it to give some highlights. After that, I took the final step of mocking the roof up with some brown and green washes to make it all dirty and covered in moss, algae, dirt and stuff like that in general. The gallery inside also still looked way too clean, so I touched it up as well. Now, the main cathedral door. I start with the iron bracing, which is easily painted because it's all black with white dry brush, you know, to imitate this old iron look that you see on so many old iron appliances, like a cast iron pan or something. The wood parts also needed touching up because although they were painted, I used them to try out different wood patterns, so they weren't quite the same. After I retouch them, they still look a little bit different, but it's not that critical because of how the door is going to be installed. And I put some rust effect on the studs to add a little spice. Now, with all the smaller elements done, let's get to the big boys, the outside of the cathedral. I wanted to have a nice sandstone look, so I decided to go with this ugly mustard color. Sienna Natural by Amsterdam. And I gotta say, this process kinda got into my head. I started doubting myself again, not being sure if I chosen the right paint, if it's going to look nice. And again, the project got postponed.
One eternity later.
Until I came back with twice the motivation and fresh ideas in my head, willing to try new stuff out and make mistakes. Remember, boys and girls, don't let your own doubts get into your head. Mistakes are okay to do as long as you learn from them. With the base color done, I went and overbrushed the thing with, I gotta take more paints with it so that I don't have to run all the time. So I overbrushed the thing with Naples Yellow Deep. And then I use my black wash again to give it the depth and all the shading it needs. After it dried, I did some stippling with the Naples Yellow again to achieve this streaky layered look you see on sandstone sometimes and in stones in general. After that came a dry brush with a very light beige with a titanium buff line by Amsterdam. to highlight all the edges. While contemplating the effect, whether or not I am happy with how the outside came out or not, I painted all the window frames black. Initially I wanted to do something more fancy, but again, keep it simple stupid. And also I used the same black to give some additional depth to some of the sculptures and overall more depth in the build. With the stained glass of the windows themselves, I was contemplating painting some little scenes or them or whatever, but the whole project was already taking a long time. I was being fed up frequently, and I decided it's better to finish it and for it to be imperfect than have a almost perfect piece of junk laying for the next decade on my shelf. So I simply opted for random splotches of color with a very diluted paint so that it's somewhat see-through and to imply there being something more than just random splotches of color. And from the distance it looks quite nice, and this piece is going to be looked at from the distance on the war table being played. As I said, this whole process gave me some time to think about the outside paint job, and I decided that it's way too bleak and washed out, pale so to speak. So I went back with something that you don't normally do, and I took the initial base color and dry brushed over it, just to give it a little bit more blush on the cheeks, you know, to give it a little bit more color, to make it nicer. And it really worked wonderfully. I'm really happy with how it came out, and you can still see through some of the streaks that I made, so it still kind of looks like sandstone. I like it. I'm satisfied. With the outside fully done, it was time to bling out the insides. First, I beveled the edge of the ruined cathedral to give it nice and smooth transition. I inserted and glued in the gallery by putting liberal amounts of glue around the columns and around the edge. All the connections are going to be covered up later, so in other words, we'll fix it in post. Being the impatient kid that I am, at the same time I glued in the doors with the advanced one-handed technique while still holding the gallery. There were some bits of the railing that broke off in the process, so I reattached them after cleaning them up from old glue. The broken part of the gallery wouldn't fit over the sculpture, so I cut one out of the boards out, weathered it, and fit it all accordingly together. As mentioned before, to hide the transition, give more structural support, and to make the overall build neater, I cut and glued in some slats, painted in the same way as all the other wooden elements. And I still wasn't satisfied with how the wood looks, so I piled in some additional washes for additional depth and weathering. All the depth, all the weathering. Then I attached the door very simply with a PVA glue, and now you can see why it wasn't that crucial for both of the doors to be perfectly the same. They don't really lie next to each other, so all these small differences don't show as much. With all the wooden elements done, I proceeded to glue in broken pieces of plaster from my various miscasts to show, you know, the stones and bricks that fell from the broken walls and the general rubble. I placed them strategically to cover all the places that, you know, look kind of wonky and need covering up. Two birds with one stone. To make it a more believable and interesting place, I put some random strips of wood, a method that I tried in my Roadrunner diorama build, but this time I paid more attention not to cover them as much and to let them show nicely and pop really well. Now, to bind the whole thing together, I decided to try a cheap texture medium that I got from my sister-in-law. It fills the gaps between stones nicely, simulates sand and dirt and, you know, various smaller rubble, and is somewhat more interesting to look at than simple sand and PVA mixture. Also, the paste consistency makes it super easy to apply. Now, before the last finishing touches, I decided to clean up my desk, but I had a visitor who had a personal vendetta against kitchen towels. I love him so much. So after the giant monster was dealt with, I could go back to painting the rubble. At first I started with the idea of painting it with washes, but my washes aren't too good of quality and the materials wouldn't take to them properly. So I switched back to regular paints. And not only regular paints, but miniature paints. Ooh. I usually strongly oppose this because, you know, they're expensive and you need a lot of paint to paint your terrain, but I didn't want to struggle against my materials anymore. And while painting such little elements, it's best to focus and put on some classical music. Anyway, the stones kinda didn't fit with the grey, stony hue, but I didn't want everything to be just beige, you know? So I made some yellow streaks on the rubble to suggest that they are too made out of sandstone of some sort. For the dirt, I decided to do some wet blending by mixing different colors on the model, and I think that I achieved some good effect. Quick and dirty wet blending dirt is my new favorite way of painting dirt, to be honest. I'm using it all the time since then. And to finish things up, as always, a quick light dry brush on all the elements to tie them together, and a heavy black dry brush on many edges to imply the fire that took place and consumed the other half of the cathedral, and some additional streaks of wash here and there because all the depth. And there we have it, that's the cathedral. Let me show you again in person. Yeah, it's quite big. It's, for my standards, it's really big. It's the biggest model that I've ever built. And I hope I will have the motivation and time to make even bigger and better things. As you see, I also placed some random tufts and grass inside to give it a little bit more color and less bleakness. That's why I love living in the city. Okay, I don't think that they're going to stop, so I'm going to stop right now. There are quite a number of things that I learned during this model, but I think we spoke about it enough during the videos, so let's leave at it. If you like what you see, give me a like, comment, subscribe. There are more videos to come. Few projects that I am working on that are due very soon, so I hope I see you again. Bye!